Right, thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dissidents and Dictators, the Human Rights Foundation's conversation series, where we expose dictators, debate pressing global human rights issues, and brainstorm how we can collectively put human rights at the very top of the world agenda. My name is Jenny Wang, and I oversee the organization's Asia-related initiatives. HRF is an international nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting and protecting human rights globally with a focus on countries under authoritarian rule. We unite people in the common cause of promoting human rights and liberal democracy. You may visit our website at hrf.org to learn more. Please also make sure to follow us here on Twitter for more conversations like this one today. Previous guests include human rights and anti-corruption activist Bill Browder, Russian democracy activist Vladimir Kara-Murza, and many more. Before we begin, please note that this conversation will be recorded to be released as a podcast episode on HRF's Dissidents and Dictators podcast series, which is available to listeners via Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Our guests this week are Babur Ilchi from Campaign for Uyghurs, Tenzin Yangzom from Students for a Free Tibet, and Anna Kwok from Hong Kong Democracy Council, as they discuss how youth in the diaspora are grappling with the Chinese government's abuses in their respective homelands. The conversation will be moderated by Mustafa Aksu, who is the program manager from the Uyghur Human Rights Project. The conversation today will highlight the Chinese Communist Party's widespread religious persecution in Tibet, mass internment in the Uyghur region, and the national security law in Hong Kong. The conversation will also shine a spotlight on how the next generation is mobilizing in the diaspora. Before we kick off, please note that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the moderated conversation. So if you are tuning in and you have any questions, please directly DM me here at hrf_CN. With that all said, thank you so much for joining us, Babur, Tenzin, Anna, and Mustafa. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Mustafa, I'll pass it on to you now.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank Human Rights Foundation for coordinating this panel. And thank you to some of my colleagues at Uyghur Human Rights Project for helping the HRF plan this informative panel that will hopefully shed light on a unique perspective we don't often hear about in discussions regarding the Chinese government's oppression and abuses abroad. And of course, and thank you to each of the guest speakers today who agreed to share their stories with us. And I feel honored to share the same platform with you all today. To begin, could you please describe what is happening in your homelands? Moreover, how would you describe these atrocities to someone who has never heard of them? Babur, let's begin with you.
Sure. Thanks, Mustafa. Hi, everyone. What I would describe what's happening in East Turkestan or the Uyghur region is genocide, essentially. We have millions of Uyghurs who are being held in concentration camps where they're routinely subject to physical abuses, torture. They're deprived of the necessities for life, like adequate shelter, hygienic quarters, sleep, food. Internees, detainees are subject to violent abuse and sexual violence. And this was something that was discussed in a February article in 2021, where survivors of these camps recounted their horrific experiences of mass rape and systematic sexual violence against them. Furthermore, what we see is this authoritarian police state that uses cutting-edge technology to monitor every single person in the region, checking their phones, their location, to make sure that they stay in line with what the party wants or desires from them. And overall, we're seeing an erasure of the Uyghur people, of the Uyghur culture, by the party that doesn't tolerate dissent or difference and is using it as a way to slowly transform the Uyghur region into something that they want.
Thank you, Babur. Tenzin, would you like to be the next?
Looks like Tenzin's having some connectivity issues. Shall we move on with Anna?
Yes, please. Anna, are you here?
Sure. So hi everyone, I'm Anna Kwok from HADC. So right now, what has been going on in Hong Kong is essentially that back in 1997, Hong Kong was handed over to China under the framework of one country, two system, which essentially promised Hong Kong and Hong Kongers to enjoy a certain level of autonomy. But throughout the years, actually the sense of autonomy has been chipped away, and the Chinese Communist Party has been trying different ways to really control Hong Kong in the background and try to implement different policies that would essentially take away people's freedom. And in response, Hong Kongers in 2019 banded together and started this mass movement and mass protest that a lot of people have seen on the newspapers, that really tried to tell the government that we want to fight for our democracy, our freedom, and the autonomy that was promised to us by international law. But instead, the government responded with tear gases, police violence, and a lot of different kinds of violence. So in 2020, the Hong Kong government, together with the CCP, decided that they would actually implement this law called the National Security Law. And the National Security Law basically is being weaponized politically to really erase all possible freedom that people can enjoy. So right now, the situation is that our city no longer sees mass protests and no longer has freedom or autonomy in any sense. And that was done through a series of political persecution. And right now we have over 1,000 prisoners in jail and also many more in waiting for their sentencing. And right now the media is also being censored, and there are only propaganda news outlets right now in Hong Kong. And even organizations that used to organize politically or used to just, gather protests, gather events, or even just to network people together are now forced into disbandment. So right now, what's more is that even our sense of identity is being erased and criminalized, that people cannot really say that they're Hong Konger. They would have to say they are Hong Kong Chinese or Chinese. And even with products, you cannot say products are made in Hong Kong. They have to be said to be made in China. So with a lot of measures like these, a lot of people in Hong Kong have decided to leave, or they're leaving Hong Kong in the coming years for fear of the national security law. So right now, the Hong Kongers are really trying to build a diaspora globally and to build a future possible path for us to go back home, possibly. But still, I would have to say that people who have decided to remain in Hong Kong are still trying to fight, and they're still trying to persist. But what we're facing here right now, as we all know, is this dictatorship that does not stop at any cost. They do not stop with our protests. They do not stop even if the world tries to really tell them to stop. They only stop if the world acts together and acts in unison to have concrete measures that stop them from to hold them accountable. So that's why I'm really glad that we're having this cross-movement conversation today, and we really have to build this more comprehensive story to let the world know what the CCP has been doing to not only its own people, but to people around the world.
Thank you, Anna, for sharing what's happening in Hong Kong and what's happening to Hong Kongers. Tenzin, are you with us now?
Hey guys, can you hear me? Apologies for that. Awesome. A couple of things about what's happening inside Tibet right now. I would probably start with the fact that Tibet is ranked as the least free country in the world, currently only tied with Syria, according to Freedom House, in terms of political rights and civil liberties. Right now, there are approximately 1 million Tibetan children in residential boarding school programs that include pre-boarding school programs away from their families and from their communities as a cornerstone of Xi Jinping's campaign to eliminate the Tibetan identity within one generation. And also monasteries and cultural sites are constantly being demolished by the CCP. And I think many of you guys know this here. It's a crime to hold something like a Tibetan flag, or to even say phrases like free Tibet, or even to even simply send, non-political things like sending money to families or relatives abroad. We've seen Tibetans inside Tibet being punished for that. So there's currently absolutely pretty much no freedom inside Tibet today.
Thank you, dear guest speakers. Discussing such personal and heavy matters with people who are completely unaware of them is a common experience as a member of the diaspora community. So, could you please describe the intersections of your identity as a Uyghur, Tibetan, or Hong Konger, and your identity as a young person in America attending American schools or working in US-based organizations, etc.? So how have these identities meshed or clashed in your experience?
I can start. Hopefully I don't subvert the discussion too much by admitting that I'm a Canadian, but I also am Uyghur. So for me, growing up, it wasn't really a thing that I thought about all that much. You know, my family was Uyghur. I'm Uyghur. I visited back home once, twice, but it never really played that large role in my life. I had always felt like I had been Canadian or become Canadian, assimilated. And it was only really when the ability to access the culture, the ability to connect with my heritage, with my family back home, with the language, all these were under threat, that it kind of woke me up, and it made me realize that this is something that's important to me, that's a part of me, and that it's something that I should be working to learn more about, not only for myself, but so that I can pass it down to generations, as well as fight for it so that it's there for future generations and hopefully for our generation right now.
Yeah, I can share a little bit as well. I, growing as someone who identifies as a Tibetan American, I would say I've always grown up a little bit conflicted about my dual identity, because I would attend public schools in the Massachusetts state systems. I always think I felt a bit Americanized in that sense, always trying to immerse myself and blend in and integrate my life as a way of preservation and survival instinct. So I often felt like I was very American throughout the weekdays, and then a little bit more Tibetan on the weekends, because I would attend Tibetan Sunday schools and then perhaps some Tibetan get-togethers and functions on the weekends. So I felt that I struggled a bit in trying to juggle my different identities and wearing different hats depending on who I was with and what I was doing in that day. But since I got involved in the Tibetan freedom movement, I was definitely able to bring those identities together in a very cohesive way. And being in the Tibetan freedom movement has allowed me to see the value in being Tibetan, and it has allowed me my identity in that sense.
I think we lost.
Right, I can share a bit as well. So I think my experience is a bit different from Tenzin and Babur in the sense that I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I have been so until when I was 17. Then I moved to Norway for my high school, and then in 2016, which was when I was around, I think, 19, then I came here to the United States to pursue my undergraduate degree at NYU. And of course, when I came here as an international student, my sense of identity would have always been being a Hong Konger, and that would be the first and foremost identity that I had. But I think with the recent change of life events in such a dramatic way that I have to be in exile, then the question has to be asked that how am I going to proceed, with how I position myself? Because a lot of the time, I think the sense of identity is really constructed by how you interact with your surrounding and what kind of context you're situated in. So right now, if I'm no longer physically in Hong Kong, in the geographical Hong Kong, how can I sustain or how can I grow my sense of being a Hong Konger, right? And that actually is still a question that I've been struggling with. But then I think the fact that because I'm working so actively in the Hong Kong movement and how I'm trying to build a Hong Kong diaspora with other Hong Kongers, so I would always say that I am a Hong Konger first and foremost, but I also have to admit that by having lived in America for several years, I'm getting more and more, influenced by different American ideals and ways of life here. But eventually, I think right now I'm seeing myself as more of a global citizen as well, because I think in a lot of advocacy work I'm doing, I'm not only talking about the values of Hong Kong or of America, right? In the end, I'm really talking about some universal values that people around the world want to pursue. And those are freedom, democracy, and really respect, for one another. And that is why I think right now the way I would identify myself is not only as a Hong Konger, but also as a global citizen that has the ability to juggle between different hats, and that would also be, talking to Hong Kong Americans or even Americans as someone who has enough cultural context and context of the country that I'm currently living in.
Thank you, Anna, Tenzin, and Babur for your responses. To follow up, how has your experience as a secondary survivor affected your idea of a community? I mean, like, how has it shaped your relationship with those who share similar backgrounds like you?
Yeah, I can start with this one. I don't think I really consider myself a secondary survivor just because I grew up in exile in India and then had the opportunity of being raised in the United States. But I would say, like, every single Tibetan person has their own unique family story of, like, devastating exile and all the traumas that sort of accompany that. And I think I see a lot of parallels in the sense that many of my Uyghur friends have family members in concentration camps. And so these are, like, the tactics that the CCP has been using for far too long. And I think I've learned a lot from the old generations, specifically my father, who grew up inside Tibet and had to flee through the Himalayas when he was about 7 or 8 years old. And it kind of gives a strong sense of what Tibetans inside Tibet have endured in the past generations, all the traumas that they've faced while trying to flee a country and then trying to, grow up in a whole different area. Like, I think that sort of gives responsibility to my generation to step up and sort of accept the roles that we have to do. And so I think because of that, community is so important because they're not just only the people, but I think it has a lot to say with, the responsibility that you carry as being the second, third generations, whether you're born up in exile or you're, born in a different area. I think that just has a lot to do with how all of our experiences can sort of unite us together.
Right. I can also share a bit about my views. Is that so? Also, I think I don't consider myself as a secondary survivor because I'm freshly, in exile, and I think being in exile has changed my way of viewing the community in the sense that back then, I think community was a rather geographically grounded concept that it has to be, the location has to be proximate. It will be about people who live in the same city. But right now, since so many of us have to go into exile and we have to be scattered around the world, but then we continue to try to organize our diaspora using, virtual platforms and using a lot of messaging platforms. And so the sense of community really have expanded to this, I think, form that you don't have to be physically together, but still you can have the unseen way of connecting to each other. But of course, I think the connection was made because we have a sense of collective trauma. And that is actually the number one thing that make our community strong, because everyone has their, a share of the trauma they've seen, but also their share of survivor's guilt that they're not the ones in jail. And so I think right now, the way I think about community, it's that I want to build a community that recognizes these trauma and these mental wounds, that I really want people to try to heal them together instead of doing it separately. But yeah, I think it's weird that we have to be, outside of Hong Kong, but then we're still maintaining a community of Hong Kong. But I think that's what we have to be doing if we want to fight against the CCP in the long run.
Thank you. What about you, Babur?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what's happening today to Uyghurs, this genocide, has kind of opened my eyes to the broader community. For me, we always had a really small Uyghur community where I lived, and that kind of made it hard to see a range of Uyghurs or meet people that I would connect with how I would normally. And so with this happening, I reached out a little more, and I found that this diaspora is online and so connected and friendly, and it's a virtual community that brings Uyghurs together as a whole, and it's been really great to see that and experience that. And I don't know if secondary survivors something that necessarily applies here, but it certainly has made me reflect on what the Uyghur that community is to me, and it's shown me that there's more ways than one to access a community of your culture and your people, and to be a part of it and be involved.
Thank you for sharing. So while you are involved in fighting for human rights against oppression abroad, and other American youth are involved in fighting for different causes, like currently the youth play an increasingly important role in the sphere of the American politics. So how has your perspective, I was not going to use the word secondary survivor, but probably I have to again. How has your perspective as a secondary survivor or being person in exile shaped your perspective on American politics? Tenzin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can definitely start. I think this question is really interesting. I would say it has definitely widened my perspective of American politics, and I think the greater understanding of colonization. Like me and SFT, we've been working a lot recently with Indigenous activists, and it's opened up a whole can of, really complex conversations and identities. And I think the best way to show solidarity is to constantly decolonize our work, whether it's, decolonize Tibet, but also just not even in just China movement, but everywhere that we are doing our work. And so when I interact with the US politics, I definitely always try to do it through the lens of colonial legacy and consideration for these indigenous folks, because I think many Tibetans are indigenous to Tibet. So I think that's also a really important conversation to have.
I can speak briefly, kind of as an outsider to American politics, but living in DC, it's been interesting to be where it happens. I think most of the ways that it's shaped my perspective is recognizing that human rights is a fundamental that has to happen everywhere, not just abroad, not just for the Uyghur people, but for all affected people, and that justice is something that is critically important to achieve for everyone. And I think the other aspect of that is that our world has become so increasingly complex and interconnected that things here can have unintentionally negative effects elsewhere. And I think the issue of Uyghur forced labor is a pretty good example of that, where solar panels that were being manufactured with Uyghur forced labor. And we need to address both issues. We can't build climate justice on the backs of slave labor, but at the same time, we can't forsake climate justice overall. We need to create ways so that justice, equity, and human rights are preserved and maintained and advanced for all people.
Yeah, I think both Yangzom and Babur brought up really good points about how, our our movement and our position as exiles really informed how we understand American politics. But one other thing that I wanted to bring up is that I think it's interesting to see how there seems to be this tension between the younger and the older generation, no matter which community or which country that we're really at. Because in Hong Kong, I felt the same thing, that youth have been trying so hard to fight to be heard and to be respected, and really they have been trying to let people who are in power to understand that youth, or the younger generation, is really the ones who should have a say in the future, because the future belongs to them. And I think that is such an interesting power structure that everywhere, a lot of places around the world have adopted. And so the division of age also usually implies, different policy priorities, but as well as the methods that people try to mobilize people. Because I feel like in our younger generation across the world, we often try to use a more horizontal approach to mobilize people, to organize protests, and to get people to support the same cause. And I think it has been interesting, and I think it has been eye-opening for me to see how American youths are also trying to adopt different methods. And in fact, actually, when I first started talking about how Hong Kongers organize our movements based off internet and how to do it horizontally, I remember some activists in the US also share how they have been learning from different movements, including from Hong Kong's movement, on how to organize. So I think there's a trend of having more and more international cooperation and learning from each other across younger generations in the world.
Thank you so much. I have always wanted to ask you this question. I think today is a right opportunity to ask. So I wonder, was there a pivotal moment in your life that propelled you into advocacy work? Or would you say it was a gradual desire that developed over time? For example, in my case, I was directly affected by the Chinese oppression and atrocities in my homeland. Like my close relatives, they were forcibly disappeared and sentenced to long years of prison or taken to these concentration camps and forced labor camps. So that was a moment that I realized that I had to do something. I have to do something. I feel obligated. I feel guilty. And I feel like I have to help them. I feel this responsibility. So I would like to hear, like, what is your experience like? What took you into advocacy work?
I can kind of relate to that experience, Mustafa. I became more involved and learned more about it because what had happened initially was we lost contact with my relatives abroad. And then we learned that my uncles had been detained for some period of time. And I could see the effect that this was having on my parents, my family, the stress that it put on our community. And it made me want to be more involved. And finally, in 2019, my grandfather, who had been detained, passed away shortly after being released. And for me, that was kind of the catalyst moment where I recognized that, staying quiet is not going to make anything better. It makes things worse because you need to expose crimes, you need to expose injustice in order for anything to happen. And, he was a prolific writer and someone who would put these thoughts into these stories that I never had a chance to discuss with him. And it was the sense of loss and recognizing that this is something that's affecting millions of families.
Thanks for sharing, Mustafa and Babur. I think it's actually quite the opposite for me and for many young Tibetans. I don't have any direct relations and family members in Tibet that I know of, and I've never been to Tibet before, nor will I have the chance to until Tibet is free. So I think it's actually the idea of returning one day back home to Tibet that kind of keeps the spirits and hopes of many young Tibetans in exile, sort of keeping us going. And I think I'm super lucky because we have so many Tibet activists that we can look up to as role models. And at such a young age, I've attended plenty of trainings from SFT as a young person, and I think it was a very natural path to take a role in the movement in that sort of way, and especially through SFT because I think it's one of the main spaces for young people to get involved and to take actions. And so I think that was sort of an activation moment for me, is just to have gone through the trainings and to see other people my mentors, my role models, becoming these, super heroic, like really important people in our movements, and just wanting to sort of follow in that like leadership role is sort of what has pushed me to, even when I'm uncomfortable at times, like to really push myself and to be the best advocate or activist that I can be.
Yeah, and I also want to share my experience. So actually, the thing that drove me into activism was because I was not physically in Hong Kong in both 2014 and 2019. So I was, trying to think of ways that I can be part of the movement, I can try to help. And then I figured out, organizing protests overseas or organizing global campaigns online would be something that I can do. But still, during the entire course of the 2019 movement, I was this anonymous leader of the more underground network that people don't really know like who we were or what my name was. I was actually working under an alias, and it was just an online profile without my name or my photo attached to it. But then eventually, some friends from my network got caught by the police, and they got imprisoned. And eventually, I figured out if I went back home, I would also be, serving some jail time. So I was struggling for a long time on whether I would want to go home, because I think the survivor's guilt really caught onto me. And I thought that the way I could contribute, or the way I could really be with my friends, would be to be in jail with them. But I think at one point I started looking around right here in the US, and I realized there's actually no one left to tell the story of Hong Kong, or you only have, very limited people left, and everyone is dealing with, their own share of trauma, and no, and of course, like the more people who can speak about Hong Kong, the better. So eventually, I decided that I would step up. And the funny thing is that I used to be working in the film industry, which is totally different from what I'm doing now. But eventually, I decided that if I don't step up, eventually there will be less and less Hong Kongers willing to step up because of the fear, and because of the fear of arrest, and not many people would be willing to give up, the chance of going back to Hong Kong. So I think that is really the pivotal moment for me, is to realize and to acknowledge that there's not so many of us out here. A lot of people who used to devote their life to activism or advocacy in Hong Kong are right now in jail. So it's really up to me and people who are outside to do more and take that extra step. And that's why I've decided to get into this line of work.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your thoughts. I really hope that more and more youth will join this advocacy team of Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Hong Kongers. We really need that. So my next question is, how have your dreams, aspirations, and goals been impacted by your experience in exile in the diaspora?
Yeah, I can start with that, because I think I mentioned it in my remarks just now, was that, before everything happened, I used to work in the film industry, and I aspired to be an artist. But because I became the survivor, different from people who are right now sitting in jail, I chose to pursue this path of advocacy for Hong Kong and paving this possibility for everyone to go home. But also, I think my sense of understanding what advocacy means have become so different, because back then it was about talking about Hong Kong in a way that only relates to human rights, democracy, and freedom. But since now, I think recently we have all decided, or we have all realized, it's important to attach the Hong Kong issues to other topics as well, and especially topics that would pique more interest for Americans who do not really know a lot about the CCP. And also, I think partly advocacy is really about building a community, because without a community, you would not have a base that support you to do the advocacy work. And essentially, advocacy work is also about telling the stories and the opinions of people from your community. So right now, really, my goal is to build this diaspora for Hong Kongers, so that we can do very robust and effective advocacy work until we can go back to Hong Kong safely and freely.
Yeah, I think I've been pretty lucky because it's impacted me in a very positive way in the sense that it's given so much meaning and purpose to my life. That being said, I don't think every, Tibetan, Uyghur, or Hong Konger should feel pressured to do this work. But now that I'm involved, I almost can't imagine like not spending my day-to-day life fighting for human rights, especially under like oppressive conditions like being under a dictatorship. So personally, I'm super thankful to have the privilege and opportunity, especially as a Tibetan, because so many Tibetans have family members inside Tibet or have some sort of relationship inside Tibet that does not allow them to have a public facing role like that I have right now. And so it's definitely a privilege. And I feel grateful in that sense and will do whatever I can to advocate for those who cannot.
Yeah, it's been an interesting last 2 years where essentially I've jumped headfirst into the human rights advocacy sphere, and I never expected to be doing stuff like this full time or to be an advocate for Uyghur people. So it's definitely been a change in direction from what I had normally been doing, which was just marketing and communication stuff. And I wanted to be able to lend my skills towards something that I thought was worthwhile and fulfilling. And so here I am.
Thank you. So to follow that, as an advocate, what is the future project you wish to take on in the coming days? Any plans or any exciting news you would like to share?
I can start. I know Mustafa, Anna, and Babur and Jenny all pretty well, so it's really nice to even just be sharing the space and to do all the work together. I really do enjoy like all the solidarity work that we've been building towards in the last couple of years, and like No Beijing 2022 was such a great collaborative campaign that we're all able to work on, and I look forward to finding another campaign that everyone can sort of 110% get behind. Also, another campaign that I'm really excited about and like that has so much momentum is the Tibet Climate Crisis campaign. I think it's going to be able to bring together a massive pool of communities in a way that other issues don't really have as much capacity to do. So I'm eager to put Tibet on the map when it comes to the climate conversation, whether it's be it COP27 or and any climate discussion that folks are having, raising it not only as a climate justice issue, but as a colonization, through the lens of colonization and through a human rights issue that every climate justice activist should care about, because those two things are linked. And I think people need to draw those connections.
Briefly, is a project that I'm excited for, or that I'd like to be doing or am excited to see happen, is greater mobilization of Uyghur youth. I think that's something that has been lacking somewhat in our communities, is the both like out in front or also behind the scenes activism from Uyghur youth. It feels, at least to me, like it could definitely be higher, that we could get more Uyghur youth into activism. And it would be great to know how to do that exactly.
Yeah, actually, to piggyback on that, we have also been thinking of ways to mobilize more second generations in the US, Hong Kong Americans specifically. And I think we actually have a lot to learn from the Tibetan community and Tenzin, because I think they have done a really good job of raising second generations and third generations that are dedicated to the movement. But so that's definitely one of the projects that we have been trying to do. And besides that, we're also currently trying to get humanitarian pathways for Hong Kongers to come to the United States, because as we are trying to help people to escape from political persecution in Hong Kong, we're also trying to build a more robust diaspora that would eventually, have a stronger voting power and policy influence power in the US that can inform the US about how to best approach the China issue. So I think these are just some projects we have right now. But on the other hand, I think what Yangzom mentioned earlier about cross-movement solidarity is really important, because it's been very empowering, really, to see how our diasporas have been working so closely together to really send out the same message about how CCP is this dictatorship that we should all collectively work together to take down and hold accountable. So I think that's definitely something we are trying to work more on. And but besides cross movement, I think cross area topics should also be explored, because right now you can see that human rights are being valued more and more in other industries as well. For example, a lot of private sector industry or tech sector, they also have a huge need to really evaluate on how they measure or how they protect human rights and freedom. So I think that's definitely something that we are trying to take on and trying to improve just to get a larger momentum to our entire movement around the world.
Thank you. It's so exciting to hear about your future projects and plans, the moments. I'm so happy. I wish you could see me now. And I'm really smiling, and I'm really excited. And indeed, solidarity is very important, and I believe we will be stronger and stronger all together. So I really hope, and we all hope actually, we could support each other and stand with each other and do more cross-movement work in the future, in the coming days. So my last question is, as a Uyghur, Tibetan, or Hong Konger, so what changes do you hope to make or see within your diaspora communities? Of course, we just mentioned about, second generation, like how we could mobilize them. But besides, what else? What do you want to see? What changes are you hoping to make?
That's the big one for me in the diaspora, is the youth of the Uyghur diaspora being able to come together and having a greater say and taking up leadership roles and being able to steer the diaspora, the community, and Uyghur activism to a direction to continue this fight so that Uyghurs can see their homeland once more, and that the diaspora is strengthened and doesn't just float away or fall apart. It would be really great to have more and more Uyghur youth being able to take up these roles where what they do and what they say matters and has an impact for the better for our community.
Yeah, and I think I would also like to share, there are really 2 points that I'm trying to change our diaspora. The first one is definitely how people change their perception of mental health issues, because I think right now our diaspora is still stunned or shocked by what happened in 2019 and how people have to go into exile because of what happened. But still, because the phrase of mental health, depression, anxiety, and so have been so stigmatized in our own community back home. So people are still trying to learn about what emotions mean and what mental health mean. But I think for us to really advance, our cause and to have a more sustainable future, it's very important for everyone to recognize and try to be more accepting of the difficulty we're facing when we come to our own mental scape and mental health. So that's definitely something I wish to change in the diaspora, is to make sure that everyone is trying to look after themselves and taking care of their own mental health. But then the second thing that I want to change in my diaspora is that I hope that our diaspora can turn into a rather political diaspora, in the sense that we don't need everyone to be working full time in HADC or UHRP or organizations like this. But then I do think that, and I do hope that everyone, when they find their career path and when they eventually move upward to, you know, a management position or, you know, higher up in different industries, that people will always have the consciousness that they are a Hong Konger, and they are still trying to find a way to go back to a free and a liberated home. And I think with that kind of mindset, actually, we can change a lot of things, and we can actually create a very vibrant diaspora where we can use our influence and our knowledge of different areas and different sectors to come together and to build a more robust and comprehensive solution to what we're facing. So right now, this is really what these two are really what I've been trying to change and help the diaspora with.
Yeah, big ups on Anna's point about like mental health. I think activist burnout and activist self-care is so important. I've seen so many Tibet activists sort of go through all those processes. I think that is something like our entire movement should be like thinking about, having conversations about. I would love to just see even more inclusivity and like openness and willingness to work with different types of groups. Another point I wanted to bring up was I think some of you guys may know about the Beastie Boys and other famous bands like U2, Red Hot Chili Peppers. So way back in the day, Adam Yao and the Beastie Boys put together these Tibet freedom concerts that were super iconic in the late 1990s. That has done an amazing job in educating the public, so like non-Tibetans, about the Tibetan freedom movement. And so I'm really always looking forward, always trying to find ways to continue to do the work that continues to inspire others to care about our movements, not just our own communities. So I think about that a lot.
Thank you so much. So I'm really honored to be here today, and I feel I learned a lot from our speakers, and like, yeah, Anna and Tenzin and Babur, thank you so much. Yeah, indeed, like what you talked about, the mental wellness is really important. I think in every diaspora groups, including the Tibetans, yeah, Hong Kongers, Taiwanese, even like Uyghurs, yeah, it is kind of taboo subjects. Like people really don't like to talk about their mental well-being at the moment. So that's one of the things, like the Uyghur communities, for example, we are trying to make changes. Like 2 years ago, a few volunteers, we established a initiative called Uyghur Wellness Initiative, and that's one of the things that we want to provide to the community, that it's okay to talk about their mental well-being, and we want to offer therapists to them. And we are still on our baby steps, and that is one of the things we want to make changes to talk to our survivors and talk to our community members, so that we let them know that they are not alone. And thank you all so much for your insightful answers, and thank you for the opportunity to moderate such an informative discussion today. And I will pass it back to HRF for the Q&A portion of this event. Thank you. Rahmat.
Thank you so much. So we will be kicking off our Q&A section. As a friendly reminder, if you do have any questions, please send me a DM here at hrf_CN. I do have one question here lined up already. So today's speakers, all of you come from different organizations. How about let's do a roundtable to learn a little bit more about each. Let's start off with Uyghur Human Rights Project. Mustafa?
Yeah, I would let Babur speak first. Like I'm trying to, take care of technical stuff. I'm sorry.
No problem. So Babur, you are Program Director of Campaign for Uyghurs. Could you share a little bit more about your organization's work?
Sure, yeah. So Campaign for Uyghurs is an advocacy group or an advocacy organization, and our primary mission is to promote the rights and freedoms of the Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan, the Uyghur region. And so since 2017, CFU has been involved in campaigning in promoting general awareness of the Uyghur genocide and the complexities around it, and advocating for Uyghur women in particular, who have faced some pretty significant, have been the focus of some pretty significant atrocities and oppression by the CCP. And yeah, I mean, we work with different Uyghur organizations like UHRP, UAA, WUC, and we also work with cross-movement groups to make sure that the message is out, that human rights are protected, that the Uyghur genocide is known, and that communities, governments, international organizations are taking action. And we have a common threat, the CCP, which is attacking the well-being, liberty, and health of all our peoples. And so we do our best to work with organizations to tackle that issue.
Thank you, Babur. Anna, would you like to go next to share a few words about Hong Kong Democracy Council, HKDC?
Sure. So Hong Kong Democracy Council is a 501c3 advocacy organization that was born out of the 2019 movement of Hong Kong. And of course, the main mission for us is to really advance freedom, democracy for Hong Kongers, and see if there are any ways that we can liberate Hong Kong from the dictatorship and the very heightened crackdown that is happening today. So essentially, we have three pillars of work that we have been developing over the past year, and that will include firstly the advocacy pillar. For example, right now we have been working on advancing humanitarian pathways and urging the U.S. to provide humanitarian pathways for Hong Kongers. And on that, actually, specifically, we have worked with UHRP in the past when certain bills were introduced. And we have also been working on sanctionings with other Hong Kong organizations such as Hong Kong Watch, Stand With Hong Kong, and CFHK. And since last year, we've also started this progressive outreach campaign with SFT. Actually, that's how I met Yangzom, to really try to gain a more wider spectrum of support for our common cause. And the second pillar of Hong Kong Democracy Council is the community pillar. And for example, last year we have done 2 national screenings of the documentary Revolution of Our Times. This documentary is actually banned in Hong Kong, so people cannot really see it in movies back home. But then we tried to really get the story of Hong Kongers abroad to the US and bring it to different theaters in the US. So in the end, we have, I think, around 24 local community groups that helped us organize different screenings around 21 cities in the US. And that was definitely a huge success. And that was an attempt to keep our identity and culture alive. And besides that, actually last month, we also organized a Hong Kong Summit, which HRF was also part of it, where we actually had more than 100 participants and also INGO representatives and also congressional office staffers to join the summit. And they had a lot of chances to network and to, most importantly, discuss where our diaspora is headed to. So that was really a very memorable event, because it was the first time that we're really seeing each other since 2019. And that was both very moving, very empowering, and very effective discussion for everyone in the diaspora. And last but not least, our third pillar is the research and education pillar. And previously, we have actually published this research report on political prisoner in Hong Kong and how the political persecution is done in Hong Kong to scare a lot of people and to spread white terror among the community. So we're going to try publish more reports in the future, because we want to keep the Hong Kong topic alive in DC and also in the general public. And also right now, because of the political climate in Hong Kong, you don't really see a lot of documentation anymore. And there's really not a lot of media in Hong Kong that can provide fair and true documentation that we can believe and we can use to tell the world what is going on inside of Hong Kong. And that's why we are trying to take on the role to produce more reports and produce more written documentation in order to inform our work and really to tell the story of Hong Kongers.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you so much, Babur, for sharing a bit about your organizations. Mustafa, are you there?
Yes, I am
Great.
here.
Perfect. Would you like to share a little bit about Uyghur Human Rights Project?
Sure. So Uyghur Human Rights Project promotes the rights of the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslim peoples in East Turkestan, referred to by the Chinese government as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, through research-based advocacy. So we publish reports and analysis in English and Chinese. Our latest reports include transnational repression. It's been widely shared by other organizations as well. So I would recommend everyone goes to our website, like uhrp.org. All of our research work and reports are there. So we released more than 80 reports and briefings, as well as more than 400 statements and press releases in the last couple of years. We also, our work has been featured in many news outlets, including New York Times, and Wall Street Journal, CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera, Washington Post, and other media outlets too. So our reports mostly about defending Uyghurs' civil and political, social and cultural and economic rights according to the international human rights standards. We also, some of our members, like staff and board members, and they have testified before the parliament in the UK, in Canada, Australia, and here as well. And we've been also working a lot on the Uyghur forced labor issues in the last 3 years, and we contributed a lot to the passage of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, and we are currently actively working on other bills in the Congress, such as Uyghur Human Rights Protection Act, which is HR 1630 and S1080, and also Uyghur Policy Act, HR 4785. And we also been working with other groups like Campaign for Uyghurs, Uyghur American Association, and we've been also doing a lot of advocacy work, like raising awareness, such as in Indonesia and Malaysia, Turkey, and we have also translated some of our reports into Japanese and Turkish and Mandarin, Chinese, Bahasa, and Malaya, and many languages. And we hope to produce more reports, research evidence-based reports. And we look forward to working with other diaspora groups too.
Thank you, Mustafa. It looks like a Tenzin dropped. I know that she is currently abroad in Germany with some choppy service, but I do want to help drop a word about Students for Free Tibet, because I really do think they do a phenomenal job. Students for Free Tibet in Tenzin, they're currently in Germany right now because they are planning a cross-movement action camp, which is an intensive 1-week training, which will provide a lot of young activists, the skills they need for campaigning or grassroots and leadership skills for building a movement. SFT is New York based, and they are a global youth network committed to helping advance Tibetan human rights and freedom. I definitely recommend you guys checking them out. They do great work. I understand that right now we're at 6:29. We're approaching our 1 hour mark, but are you guys okay with one more question?
Yep.
Great. So, great. So a theme that came out across this conversation that was really strong is saying how important cross-movement solidarity is and how we're all stronger together. Do you have any advice for youth in other movements on how to stand up against dictatorship? So it could be the CCP, or it could be Russia, or it could be Cuba, it could be Egypt. Do you have any advice for them?
Right. I guess I can start, but I think it's really observations, but not advices, because right now the CCP is still there. So I'm not exactly, succeeding at taking down, dictatorships yet. But I think one thing that I have learned is really in a lot of in a lot of crackdowns that have been committed by the CCP, the one thing that they have tried to do all the time is really to destruct the networks that people have built and destruct the sense of community that people have. And that is always the most toxic and I think destructive crackdown that they do. Because the thing is, in Hong Kong, when the political persecution started happening, there were a lot of, I think the government was first really targeting those who have been, the network nodes that pull different communities together. And in that way, different communities would find it harder and harder to communicate with each other and harder to be on the same page about an action or about, a stance that they would like to collectively take. And eventually, trust would be lost and people would start to, doubt each other and what each other is doing. So I think this sort of it's not exactly an infiltration, but this sort of sowing mistrust within the community is by far the thing that destroys the movement the most. But I'm not saying that people have to band together no matter how someone have done abusive actions. But still, I think it's really realizing people is the strongest power you have, and it's always people banding together that ensure we can do something together. Because if it's only one person or if it's only a few people trying to take down a dictatorship, it's not going to work. It has to come from the entire community, and it has to come from a very wide group of people. So that is definitely something I would try to stress, as always, to build trust and to build community. And also one thing is that I think solidarity, of course, Hong Kongers have been building it with, Tibetans, Uyghurs, Taiwanese, and people who have been directly under the impact of the CCP. But still, I think it's very important and crucial to have wider solidarity with people in other areas, such as activists, in Latin America, activists in Europe, or activists fighting against Russia. I think it's important that we band together as a global coalition rather than just regional-based collectives that try to stand against dictatorships. And that's why I think HRF has been doing a very good job of trying to pull people from different areas together so that we can learn from each other and really be inspired by each other, by the way, in the way we fight and in the way we resist.
Thank you, Anna. That was a great answer. Mustafa, Babur, was there anything you wanted to add or chime in?
Not really, but I think we are still like in the process of learning from each other, and also it is like the cross moment, like Tibetans and Hong Kongers and Uyghurs start to demonstrate together and work together in the very recent years. And in the past, I think each organization has their own agenda, or like each groups have their movements were very different from each other. But I really thank you, HRF, for putting us all together today to create this platform to exchange our ideas and thoughts. And I really look forward to working with other groups in the coming future.
Well, thank you, Mustafa. Babur, was there anything you wanted to add on regarding that question?
I think that Anna and Mustafa have said is probably the best answers they could give. I have nothing more to add.
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess before we wrap up today, all three of you, Mustafa, Babur, Anna, are there any other final call to actions or any final messages for all of us tuning in here today?
If I can be a little shameless and say that if you want to keep up with what Campaign for Uyghurs is doing, you can follow our Twitter account at @CUyghurs, the letter C and then Uyghurs. That's where you'll find all the actions, our press releases, what we've been doing and what we're going to get up to. And if you have 5 minutes after this, if you go to forcedlaborfashion.org, and labor is spelled with a U, and you can find a bunch of actions that you can take to lend your voice to thousands of people who are calling out brands that are complicit in Uyghur forced labor. And if you could do that, that would be great as well. And thank you again, Human Rights Foundation, for hosting this Twitter space.
I'll also follow Babur's lead to shamelessly plug our organization. So if you want to keep up with what's going on in Hong Kong, you can also follow Hong Kong Democracy Council at HADC_US. We try to describe, what's been going on and what's been developing in Hong Kong. And right now, it's been difficult to have international media cover a lot of developments on the ground, just because it's very difficult to do journalism inside of Hong Kong right now with the censorship that's been going on. So we will also try to translate some of the news in Chinese into English to let everyone know what's going on the ground. And also we're now recruiting our fall interns and fellows. So if anyone is interested, or if anyone knows of anyone who could be potentially interested in doing advocacy work, community building, and research work for Hong Kong and the Hong Kong diaspora, please send us an application, and we'll be very happy to work with everyone here. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing. Yeah, follow us on our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Uyghur Project. And also, you can join our mailing list. You can go to our website, uhrp.org. And you could also volunteer or intern for us. We need people who who can speak Mandarin and English and other languages. If you could speak Bahasa, it would be also great, because we are trying to raise awareness in other countries as well. And also, if you are U.S. citizen, I would ask you to contact your member of Congress to urge them to support or co-sponsor the Uyghur Human Rights Protection Act and Uyghur Policy Act. And you can go to our websites and click the Take Actions button, and you could learn what you can do for us. And also, yeah, you could also can donate to the organization, and the money will go to our refugees and camp survivors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mustafa, Babur, Anna, and Tenzin, who just dropped. But thank you all for joining us today and for sharing your stories and your experiences. As a gentle reminder, this discussion will be adapted as a podcast episode, and it will be released onto HRF's podcast series, Dissidents and Dictators. And that's available globally on Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. For everyone tuning in today, if you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to follow all the speakers here today. And I also echo their message that solidarity is incredibly important. So yes, please go follow and support them. Go follow the Uyghur Human Rights Project. Their Twitter handle is @Uyghur Project. Go follow Campaign for Uyghurs. Their handle is the letter C, Uyghurs, C Uyghurs. Follow Students for a Free Tibet. Their handle is @SFTHQ. And please also follow Hong Kong Democracy Council, and their handle is @HKDC_US. These organizations and these youth leaders are at the very forefront of pushing for a more peaceful, just, and free world, and we must support them. Once again, thank you all for joining. Be sure to tune in next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.